Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 and the finale of my N1 N2 junked Revell Starfighter, N1 Starfighter build. A lot of fun on this kit. Really enjoyed all the scratch building and the modification and the kit bashing and tons and tons of 3D printing, that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I did my first 3D print of some figures to start doing some sizing of these for my diorama. And what I also did, I'm not going to pick it up right now, but I have some, you can see under there, some styrene tube, a thicker piece under the main body, and then smaller ones underneath each of the engines to raise it up just a little bit. It actually is up on jacks on the show. The rest of the time that we see it, it's always hovering. It doesn't have landing gear. It's just hovering. But it's not flat on the ground. It never just sits down on the ground on the body or the engines. So I wanted to raise it up a bit. That way, this is how it'll be displayed on the diorama. But in addition, that'll give me a better idea of the size of the figures by comparison. And what I did was I took some shots from the show, which I'll show you here in a moment. And I'm just kind of comparing like Peli Motto's size to the engine, also compared to the rest of the ship and that kind of thing. Just sort of looking at the shots and getting an idea of how tall she would be, and then comparing her to Mando once I print him and that kind of thing. Obviously, I printed some pit droids, and I've made several different sizes. So there's 3 different sizes of the pit droids, and just kind of testing it. Little BD1, I believe is his name. Little teeny, he was very delicate. I've already broken 2 of the legs on these pit droids. Had to super glue them back on. So I'm gonna have to be careful with them. And what I'm going to be doing is, as I said in my previous video, is I'm going to have her positioned basically about here. And I'm going to have my engine piece that I modified to look like it has the connector part to go into the engine. And I'm going to have 3 of the pit droids holding it up. One of them is going to be holding this part, and then one over here, one over here. And I can modify these. I can cut off or easily break off, because they keep breaking, the arms and move them around into different positions. So that's not a problem. I can do what I need with that, and get them to where they want to be, where I need them to be. Definitely very delicate. These are all one piece 3D prints. But they'll definitely work for how I want them to. And what I'll probably do, I don't want to try to support, I might not be able to get him to stand up again. No, of course not. I don't want to try to support this plastic piece with just these droids. They're going to break. So what I'll probably do is have something like a metal pin or something coming down into the base that I'll paint with some sand color to hide it. Have this positioned where I want it to be in relationship to the engine, right about here. And then once that's solid, I'll just position these pit droids around it and move their arms to look like they're holding up the engine piece. But I'm not going to try to support them on these really delicate, fragile arms. So these are from several different prints so far. And I'm using files from cgtrader.com, Cults 3D print or 3D.com as well. They have some good files, both of those companies. In addition, I also got some files from my friend Jeffrey Fink. I haven't had a chance to pull those up yet. I have quite a few different files set up ready to go, and start printing some of those. obviously for tables, machinery, different things in her shop. I have a file from Cults 3D that's actually accurately designed cabinets and a table and the different sci-fi Star Wars looking whatever machinery, not machinery, but cabinets or containers I guess is what you would call them, that kind of thing, that are in the show. In addition, the droids and the little BD1, and there's also a Mando figure, came from a pretty cool file from cgtrader.com that has the N1 Starfighter, a small one. It's only like a 4-piece solid resin ship. It's smaller, but it has Mando, it has the pit droids, it has R5, it has little BD1, it has a little diorama base for it. So that was a nice file, and these are pretty cool. And I like that they're one piece. It would be so much harder to try to print these at this scale in different pieces. That's kind of the hard part of doing 3D printing, is that for this size, to find something that is going to work well, I really need something like an all one piece figure. Peli Motto is actually a torso, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. Now, I did not use the head that came with it. I actually got this head as a separate file. I think it's a little more accurate to her looks. I think it looks pretty cool. And the head's actually open underneath, so I can put it down onto this. And the body is supposed to be like a Kenner action figure, where it's posable, and the same with the arms. What I'll end up doing is puttying around those joints to make them look all one piece, and the same with the arms once I get that in place. I believe it also has like a belt and other things, but I'm not going to try to use those, like a tool belt. I'll just scratch build my own. It's a lot easier. But that gives me the basic Peli Motto figure. And I made 3 different sizes, but I ended up looking at these 2. And I'm still not decided yet on the bigger one or the medium-sized one. But I'll kind of play with that and go with that there. So, all right. So looking pretty cool. Let me go ahead and do some more printing of some more files. Once I get Mando and Peli Motto in scale with what I want for the diorama, I'll base everything else on them and just look at shots and figure out how big the other things are supposed to be for this. So, okay. So I started working on the wood base that the diorama is going to go on, and what I'm using is I went to Hobby Lobby and I was looking around in their various wood frames and wood pieces, and found this really cool part which is perfect for what I need. It's 2 feet long. It's about 14 inches deep out to this edge. And what it was, I guess, is some kind of a wall hanger. It had, you can see the spots where there were 2 slats nailed on, and they had a little hanger part on it. And then the other side has an indented opening. So I'm guessing you would have put like a picture in it or something. I'm not sure, but hanging on the wall. But it's perfect for me, and it's nice and thin. Nice solid piece of wood, and I'm not doing any lighting, so I don't need to have batteries underneath, so the low profile was perfect. So then I took some 1/8 inch thick plywood and I glued it along the edge and nailed it in place for the back and the 2 walls, and then the front will just be open. And then what I did was I used some other basswood, and I think this is balsa wood, to finish the corners and to do these 2 pieces right here. I've been looking at some stills or some shots from the show, trying to get an idea of how the structure looks. It kind of looks like there's some triangular parts coming down from here. Looks like stone supports, and they're all chewed up. Junk everywhere. I mean, there's a bunch of racks on the back walls, just loaded with junk and machinery. This side has 2 doors on it with some other machinery and such things. So let me get the ship and put that on here and show you how that's going to fit. All right, so even though this is a really big base, the ship is big too. Even without the spine on the back of it and the other parts here, this is about 1 foot long. It's still a very big model kit. But it fits in there nicely. Gives me enough room to put some things around it. I don't want it to be too crowded in, but it fits there nicely into the diorama. Looking pretty cool. And let me show you what I was talking about in the previous video. So I have styrene tubing on the bottom. The bottom's just glued on right now. I mean, not glued on, taped on right now. I still have to get it painted and paint the engine. I'm not really doing much else on the bottom because you're not going to see it. But those styrene tubes raise the ship up just a little bit so it's not sitting flat on the actual ship. And I played with them until I got it to look pretty even, because these are kind of level, but then because of the curves of this is raised up in the air, obviously, but it's still a straight shot the way the ship is supposed to look. So that's going to give it a better positioning on the diorama. I've been looking at the floor. The floor has a lot of sand on it, but it also has some square panels. At first I thought it was like a square tile kind of thing, and I was looking at some styrene sheet that had the square tiles in it, but the more I looked at it, the more I see that the panels are uneven. They almost look like flat stones. So what I might end up doing is just making some up, you know, maybe with some thin balsa wood, just cutting out some squares and just positioning them around. And then, like I said, there's only a few sticking out here and there, but mostly it's just sand. Sand is covering everything. It also looks like a few spots where there's actually some bigger panels that are next to each other. It looks like they're loose, as though they stuck something down on there in order to be able to position something that wasn't on the sand. But let me go ahead and show you the figures. So So here's the Peli Motto figure. I haven't finished her yet, but I think this is the size that I'm going with. It's kind of the medium version. So I tried printing the one-piece Mandalorian that I had mentioned earlier, but it completely failed. It didn't even stick to the plate, so I don't know if there was something wrong with the file, what the situation was. So I didn't want to keep playing with it. It was a little more tricky too because it had a cape on him, which was sticking out a little bit from the body, and I don't think a lot of that would have printed. So what I ended up doing was using 2 other files that I have of the Mandalorian. One of them that's in a pose where he's pointing his arm out with his gun and straight out to his side. But I wanted to use some different arms. So I used the arms from a different file that I had and modified them to be the right size. So I printed quite a few parts, as you can see, and the trouble is, as I showed on the plate or on the computer in the software, it looks like they're correct, but it's still hard to judge completely the right sizes. So the first batch I did of 3 different sizes were too big, and the problem is at this scale if you went from a size of, let's say, 35% to 27%, is a big difference in the size because they're very tiny as it is. So the first 3 I did were too big. So I went back and I did 3 more and adjusted for the size. Now this particular parts, this is the kit part. I was just trying to make some comparison. Actually comes with like 12 parts for the whole Mandalorian. It has his chest, his legs, his feet, which are separate. The arms are actually separate pieces with the shoulder and the other arms that I replaced. His helmet, of course. There are some extra plates on his sides, his cape. So quite a few parts. Let me get the first one that I did, the smallest of the first one I did, and then I'll show you. All right, so this was from the first batch. Obviously way oversized. I don't know what I was doing or what I did, but that one was way too big. So this was the second attempt. And it kind of looks a little closer to Peli Motto, and giving you an idea of what she's supposed to look like compared to him, but still, he was actually closer to the largest version of her, which I didn't end up using, but he was still too big. So he's still too big when compared to the ship. He doesn't look like he would really fit in the cockpit right. And compared to the version that I put in the clean N1 Starfighter, he looked way too out of scale. So the last one I ended up doing is a lot closer, and you can see the big difference. So I think this was like 27%, and this one was like 32% or something like that, but still way too big on this one. But this is going to be the end size that I'm going to go with. So he turned out a lot better, a lot closer to her and how he's supposed to look. I think he turned out pretty well. I did have to, you can see how those arms are a little different. I did have to modify those to fit onto the shoulder parts. And there's that arm that's sticking out, but instead of having it looking like it's straight out with a gun, I have his arm like he's working on something. So what I can do is I can have him holding a tool and reaching out and maybe like a grinder and grinding on the ship to remove the paint. I can even run like a hose. It's supposed to be like a cord through his left hand up to the grinder and work with that. But it's got a little gun on his side plate or holster, his right side plate. His cape, of course. At one point, he has his jetpack on, but then later on, he doesn't have it on. So I was going to say, like, I don't want to put a jetpack. Why would he keep his jetpack on while he's doing some work? But he didn't. But he still has his cape on. So I kept that on there. In this particular pose, obviously, the cape is kind of blowing off to the side a bit, which I think looks kind of cool. It gives him a neat little action pose. All right. So I think I have him where he's supposed to be, and her, she needs some more work. He's pretty close to, well, he's pretty much at the point where I can start painting him and doing the different outclads and other colors. I even put his head, I kind of cocked his head to the right to look like he's looking in the direction of his arm, his helmet. So it looks like he is actually working on something, and modified it. So that worked out fine. A lot of times it does seem like it's better to have one piece for a figure, but in many cases like this, it wasn't that hard to print the separate arms and legs and things like that. They were easy to support and print out, and then and just glue them together and modify them to do different poses. So I have them nailed down, and I have the droids, I think, where I need them to be for the moment. So what I'm going to start doing now is doing a little bit more work on the main structure of the workshop, and then the next thing I'll start printing out some other of the workshop parts, like the cabinets and the table and tools and containers and things like that. So, all right. All right, so quite a bit of work, and I finished basically the basic outer walls of the diorama. So the first thing I did was I used some thin styrene sheet to rebuild this whole piece over here with these doors with some stripping. For the little green, red and green lights that are there, I just used some small googly eyes, painted them. I'm still going to put some weathering on this. A lot of this you're not going to see at all. This whole place is going to be junked up, especially around the perimeter. So you're going to have machinery and containers up here. I'm going to put some more things here with wires and cables hanging down, that kind of thing. I'm thinking about some shelving back through these areas, piled with different machinery and junk and that kind of thing. So a lot of that you're not going to see. On this end, I made two what looks like corrugated doors that you pull up, and glued them on. And then for all of this, I just put right over the wood, I put down some of the static grass glue first of all, and sprinkled the scenic sand material that I get from Hobby Lobby, and let that dry overnight. And then once that was set up, I went back in with a little spray bottle with some of the scenic cement, which is really thin watered down PVA glue that you get. It's designed to hold this stuff on, and sprayed it over it, and then I just added a lot more sand, so it's already pretty well solid and dry, and when it fully sets up, it's as hard as a rock. Also, these are two pieces of foam that I cut. Initially they came all the way down, but it was sticking out a little too much, so I just hacked off a piece, and I'll just put something in front of that. But it kind of gave it the sandstone look around the edge, which a lot of the Tatooine type of architecture is set up with. We don't really see over here at all, and we don't really see anything back there except a bunch of junk, so I wasn't all that worried. We do see a little more of this, and so that's where I got the idea for the doors. All right, so what I'm doing now is I drew some lines onto the wood to try to get some spacing. And I tried to make them 1/2 inch across, but they didn't quite come out perfectly. What I'm doing is I got some very thin balsa wood. I believe it's 1/16 of an inch thick, pretty sure. And it's a 1/2 inch wide. So it's easy to cut. I can cut it with a pair of scissors, and then into little squares. And then I'm gluing them down with some of my Aleene's felt and foam techie glue. So I don't want them to be perfect. Initially I got a styrene sheet that had uniform squares, and I was going to cut out pieces, because most of this is all just sand as well on the floor. You see little patches where there's clearly some squared off tiles or stone or something. But I didn't want them to be even. And then I wanted some decent gaps between them so I can get sand down inside of the gaps, and just really make them look like they're just all beat up and dirty, and you know, it's all worn out, and there's sand covering it all. So I'm going to go ahead and keep working on this, and I'm not going to put these over the entire surface. I'm just going to have patches like this. And for now, I kind of marked out some areas where the ship is going to sit, the little styrene tube underneath it, in the center of it, so that it's going to rest on some of these tiles, and it'll be even. I don't want to try to glue that down onto sand. It'll just be a little harder. I mean, ultimately the ship is going to be 5-minute epoxy down, and I can put a lot there because you're not going to see it underneath. but I did want to have something like that underneath it. So, all right, coming along really nicely though, and starting to take shape as a Tatooine workshop. All right, so I finished all of the tiles. I'll just call them tiles. I don't know what they're made of. And I did some even patterns in certain places, like over here, a few spots around here. I didn't do a lot in this area because the ship is obscuring all of that anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I definitely have spots where the styrene tube at the bottom of the ship is going to land here, over here, and over here. The ship will be positioned right here. And also ones here where Peli Motto is going to be standing and the droids are going to be standing. So what I'm going to start doing now is painting these tiles. I'm just going to do it by hand. It'll just be easier than to try to do some masking, whatever, and airbrush it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I'm going to use a couple different colors. I have a few here that I'm looking at. Let me see where these at. Figure out what I want to do. So it's definitely darker than the sand. So let's see, I have some dark earth. I have some flat brown. Some dark brown. I have some sand yellow, and then I have a little bit of light gray, real pale blue gray. So the idea is, what I'll probably do is start with the dark brown or the dark earth and do some layers. I'll start putting some down, let that start to dry, then I'll add some a little bit lighter, and almost like a dry brushing technique, similar to what you do when you get a wood grain look. The gray kind of makes it look faded, so you can water that down a bit and put that over top of it. So I'm going to paint all these first before I apply any of the sand material. Let me go ahead and show you a still from the show, and I'll show you what I mean by the tiles and the color that they are and what I'm kind of going for. All right, so here is a screenshot. It's on my TV, so excuse the glare. I just stopped the image there, but you can see there are the stones that are kind of squarish. They're not perfectly square, but they look somewhat uniform, like at some point they were. And I'm saying stone. They kind of look like stone, but I'm not sure what they are. But you can definitely see them over here. You can see them there. You can even see them here. But of course, there's lights that are obscuring it. Those are lights coming down from light panels in the ceiling or whatever. It almost looks like natural sunlight. Maybe there's some openings coming down into the room. But you can see how some of them are very well covered with sand, a lot of the sand. But there's other ones where there's patches sticking out. There's some back here that you can see, some over here. So that's why I went ahead and did the patchwork kind of a thing. And then I'll fill in sand between them and cover some of them with a light dusting of sand as well, so that they're obscured. And the nice thing is you can definitely see the sand in between the cracks. That's what I wanted. So that would be the first thing I'll do, is get sand down into them once I get them painted. So now I'm thinking about how to paint them. They're definitely darker than the rest of the sand. But again, it's hard to tell if they're supposed to be like stone or whatever they're supposed to be, but they definitely look a little bit darker. So I'm going to play with some colors to try to make those darker than the sand and have them stand out. All right, and here are the final painted floor tiles, stones, whatever they're supposed to be. Several layers of paints. I think I used like 5 different paints from darkest to lightest, and just after the first initial dark brown, I just dry brushed with my Artify brushes. I showed in my last video, and just went over them to get a bunch of different shades. And ultimately I might go over them a little bit with some weathering powders once everything's done, just to get a contrast between this and the sand. So the next thing I'll do is get the sand, and I'll brush it in between. The sand's going to be all over this entire surface, of course, but it's also going to be in between the cracks, and a lot of these tiles are going to be still visible on the floor. So let me go ahead and do that. Right, so now that it's fully dried and set up, the sand has hardened overnight. I went back in, and I didn't like the stark differences. It was a little too stark with the wood pieces or the tiles. So I went back over with this dirty white weathering powder, which is actually more of a tan. And I used a cheap brush to just lightly dust it over the tiles. And what it did was it blended them more in with the tan color and took away the stark, drastic images. This part here, it broke some of the sand loose between some of the tiles, so I went back in with some more of my scenic cement and some sand and put it back in to repair it. So that looks a little different in shade right now because it's wet, and that has to dry again. So you can still see the difference, and actually in the camera, there's still more of a stark difference between the tiles and the sand, but in reality, it's not. It looks a whole lot more. If I take it back further, it looks a whole lot more blended together in one tone, rather than being a bunch of separate different colors. Because the idea, excuse me, the idea is that I just want to show some variations in the colors, and that's a key to layering a lot of different colors and tones, is that ultimately you're giving your eyes something to pick out, and just seeing the slightest little variations in colors and tones and shades and things like that. And that's what makes something look realistic in reality. You know, if you just painted something all one color, it would obviously look unrealistic, because in reality, especially in nature, like sand or, you know, larger areas, they have a bunch of different shades in the way the light hits it and that sort of thing. So this definitely adds a lot more of that variation to the tones, to look like this floor has a lot going on. But the floor isn't the main focus, of course. So, but I still want it to look definitely more realistic and more random, like a floor would. So, all right. So this is all done at this point. I'm going to go ahead and start working on printing out the other materials and accessories that I'm going to be putting into the diorama, with things like shelving in the back over here, a table up in this area, obviously various containers, Star Wars-like containers, to bring that to life. Most of those are going to be in the perimeter, but I'm going to have some parts, different machinery parts and junk parts and things like that, with the characters, of course, in the main area with the ship. All right, we start working on those, and then this is definitely starting to come together. All right, so I painted up a lot of the parts for the diorama. The main thing I did were the metal cabinets, which I painted with a steel first of all, and then I did the salt and hairspray, and then painted a couple different shades of gray, because a lot of these cabinets are gray painted, but these are old and chipped up. I think those turned out pretty nicely. And I have two sizes, the larger one and the smaller one. It's got a little chip piece, but I can cover that up with whatever I'm going to put onto the cabinet. So these are all going to line the back wall. I also have some wooden pallets, as you can see. And a lot of these, all of these really, I still have to weather. Do some weathering with oil effects. These little box shaped things, which are accurate to the show. I found these a foul of these ones, and then these ones here, these parts here. And again, I'm still going to add some more painting highlights on these little ones here. And I did actually see that there were some that were, I think, yellow and red, but I decided to do a blue, yellow, red, and just a metallic. This container for like little parts, I can snip up some little bits and throw them in there and make them look like bolts or screws or whatever. Decided to go with blue on that, give it a little bit more color here. These fuel barrels. And then a bunch of engine parts, well, including whatever these things are. So the same ones I repeated a couple times. I really like this little engine block. It's really cool. A lot of detail on it. Came out nicely with the, I think some of these I did aluminum, some I did the chrome. But what I'm going to do is, because they're the same shape, I'm going to, some of them I'm going to make look cleaner and newer. Some will be more dirty and oily. But a lot of them will be stacked on these shelves and that kind of thing. Little disc, like a disc brake. It's pretty cool. So there's a nice little detail in between it. All right. Very, very cool. So let me go ahead and get out the diorama and position some of these just to kind of get an idea of how they're going to look. All right, so this isn't the final positioning. I'm just trying to get an idea, but it's kind of how I'm going to want it to probably look. I really liked how the cabinets are looking. What I ended up doing is, since a lot of these motors are the same ones, and like I said, I still have to dirty these up and grime them up with oils and oil paints and things like that. So they're going to bring out a lot more of the detail. These are quite detailed little motors that I got. Really amazing. Let me show you this one here. Detail on the top. These detailed little belts on pulleys. We've got the piping on the sides. There's even little holes in the openings of the piping. Very, very nice. And then you've got these big ones. Same thing. It says a little name on it, I'm not sure. Somebody's going to tell me in the comments what that is, but I knew what it is. I can't remember. But anyway, little oil cap on top. Again, little pulleys on the ends. Very nice. Most of these parts I got from an Etsy file. like the cabinets, all the engine parts. I got from an Etsy file. It's like 180 parts, something like that, a machine shop. There's other ones in there too. I'm going to print some more things out. The fuel drums I got from Jeffrey Fink, and there's some other parts that I'm going to print from his as well. These pieces here, these square crates, these parts, I got from a Cults 3D file that are accurate to the containers that Peli Motto has in her workshop. Kind of cool. And then of course I had the figures that I've shown previously. So definitely starting to come together and looking a lot nicer now that I have some paint on these. And then once I get them weathered and dirtied up, they're going to match a lot more with the rest of the diorama. Now there are a bunch of other parts, but a lot of what the other parts are going to be is, well, first of all, I'm going to build a little workbench right up in here, which is interesting because at one point during the montage we don't see anything here at all. Then in another scene, Mando and Peli are talking and she's asking him to hand her a part, and there's obviously a workbench right here and they're looking at parts on it. So the things move around in the scenes. So I'm going to build a workbench and I'm going to have that here, but I'm going to have a lot of the parts of the ship itself, like the canopy, which is all dusty and dirty looking, and there's some extra parts on the bottom of it that look like it would go down inside of the ship to make it look like it was pulled out. I'm going to have a tarp on the end of this, and there's actually some tarps on some of these, and there's also a bunch of other tall junk just shoved in here. This whole place is junked up from her. You know, she's definitely a hoarder of spaceship parts and things like that. I mean, she's very good at what she does, obviously, but she does have a lot of junk. It's even funny at one scene, she's talking about the Jawa. She says, oh yeah, they go out and get stuff from me because I let them look through my dumpster. What's in your dumpster? You never throw anything away. Your whole workshop is just filled with junk. So it's just funny. But a lot of the ship's parts, like the tail parts, are separate. You're going to have one of the spires I'm going to have over here that they're putting it in. Another one is over here and is maybe a piece of tarp over it. Some of the parts I cut away, I'm going to paint them up with alclads, like they're newer parts, with the idea that maybe she got them from somewhere else and they're going to put them onto the ship. So, and I kept a lot of the parts I cut away so I could do that very thing, that I can use them and have them out here strewn among some other little parts to give you the idea that the parts are all here. They just have to be put together and put onto it. Maybe she has to get a couple more from the Jawa, that kind of thing, during the montage. So, all right, looking pretty fantastic. All right, so one more set of 3D printed parts, and I think the final ones that I'm going to do. I noticed that there were some propane tanks and things like that, so I had to get another file. The one that I got for the garage parts didn't have any, but I got these cool propane tanks. I did these batteries. These are from the car parts, and I painted 2 of them blue and 2 black. Also these fuel canisters, just painted them red. And I printed 2 of these. These are like crates or containers, and they have a lid. These are from Jeffrey Fink as well. These are pretty cool. I still have to paint the inside of them and figure out if I'm going to put something in them or just have them like this, like, you know, displayed as a as a container like that. And then I got these two cool parts from the machine shop. This is supposed to be like an oil changing station, but I'll just make it into whatever sci-fi part it's supposed to be. And then this is really, really cool. This is an air compressor. The detail on this thing, unbelievable. This was one piece. I did have some trouble with the handle, broke a little bit, so I put a couple of pieces of styrene stripping on it. But as I've said before, it doesn't really matter because these parts are going to be beat up anyway, and so I don't care if they're broken to some degree. It's okay because she would have repaired them. Peli Motto. That little compressor part up there, amazing, just amazing. So these parts that are the aluminum and the propane tanks, I'm going to go ahead and do the salt and hairspray. So I have some hairspray in a bowl, some salt in a little cup. I'm going to get and apply that on, and then I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to paint these mostly white or maybe some other colors over top, and then chip them away just like I did on the rest of them. So, all right. All right, so I started to glue the machinery onto the cabinets, onto the metal shelving. And because I have repeated engine parts, I kind of moved them around and switched the position. Like that big one on the top, you can see this side of it. And then on another one, there it is on the bottom, but it's angled differently, so now you're seeing the pulleys and the pipe coming out of it. And on this one here, you're seeing this side of that engine. Plus you can see that part of it there. And the same with like these ones. This one right down here at the bottom is actually this one here, but because I flipped it so that this was facing up, it looks like a different engine part. Here's my weathered and dirtied propane tanks, my fuel tanks. There's one of the blue batteries. Another propane tank. A really cool looking engine block. And the same thing, so the engine block, I repositioned it a couple different ways so it would look different. There's a little disc from a disc brake, one of the blue propane tanks, black batteries. All right, so what I'm using is CA glue and a little bit of accelerant in a little bottle with a needle tip. I was going to use 5-minute epoxy, but it would take a little too long to get it going and get them positioned right, and I didn't want to have a lot of the clear epoxy showing through, so the CA was a lot easier. I just sanded the bottom that was going to stick, put some CA on it, sat it down, put some kicker around it, and then it hardened, and I could just keep doing each one. So, all right, so we finished working on these positioning the shelves and the different machinery. I got the air compressor weathered, looking really sweet. Look at that detail that's there. What amazing detail for a little 3D printed part. And this is one piece. Astounding, truly astounding. That looks really, really cool. All right. All right, so I'm also working on doing some tarps. And I used a partial idea from Augie Gonzalez. He made a sea view ocean diorama about a year or so ago. And what he did was for the water, and I think he got this idea from others as well, is he took wet wipes. And he first sculpted out of clay, air dry clay, the ocean waves, and then used the wet wipes over top of it with some gel medium in order to set them in and smooth it out. So I used a similar idea, except what I'm using is, I am using wet wipes, and these are from Cottonelle. And you have to pick ones that don't have any kind of pattern or engraving into them. Some of them do. They have like the logo of the manufacturer. But I found these from Cottonelle. They did have a bit of a jagged edge on it, so I snipped that off and cut it in half. These are two different halves of one wet wipe. Now what I did was I let it sit out for about an hour, and they just naturally dry out and just turn into like a almost like a paper towel, but sturdier and definitely rigid. And then I cut it. And so what I'm doing is I took some of my Aleene's felt and foam tacky glue, and I mixed it in a cup about 50-50 with water till I got a nice thin consistency. I'm doing it on this piece of plastic from some styrene sheets so it doesn't stick to it. You can see how thin this is. It's almost like a thick milk. And then I put in some paint. So the one I'm working on now, I used some sand yellow to get kind of a tan look. And the glue's already white, so depending on how much you add, it gives you whatever shade that you want. This one here, I used some gray, and this one is actually set up. I'll show you how cool that is. So I molded it over the shelf. I actually started this one by molding it over one of my damaged shelves that didn't print right. And I liked how it was looking. So once it started setting up, I took it off of that one and put it on this shelf. And you can see I have it like hold at the bottom as well. And I've already fitted it into the diorama, so I know it's going to fit where I want it to be. And it's not 100% set up, but it's already very close. You can see it's pretty rigid. And I think overnight it'll get even more so. And I can even go back and add some stains with some oil wash, or add some powders on it, make it look dusty. But I think that looks fantastic. How it molds to the shelf. And it even has like a fabric texture in it from the actual wipe. And these are disposable wipes that you would use, like flushable wipes you would use in the bathroom. Sorry for being a little gross there, but I don't want you to think that I'm using the hand sanitizer wipes. These aren't. These are just like, they don't have alcohol in them. I'm not sure what it is, some kind of just water-based sort of thing. But turned out fantastically. What it also helps me to do is I don't have to have as many parts on the shelf because I have it covered with the tarp, so that obscures some of that. I still need to add a few more parts, but that one's ready to go. It's really cool. This one's drying right now. You can see just how that looks like an actual tarp, crinkled up piece of cloth, and that's setting up. So I'll let this sit for a few hours, and then I can pull it back off pretty easily off of the plastic, and then position it where I want it under the base once it starts drying. I don't want to get any of this glue on the sand of the base and mess that up. And I just have a few parts in there right now, a battery and one of the discs from a disc brake. But same situation, I'll put in some more parts in here and here, maybe something up on top. That's going to be pretty awesome. So okay, all right, so I pretty much finished all of the shelving with the various machinery on it. I used up all the motors and things that I had. I do have one or two spots yet, and I have an idea of how to fill that. But let me kind of show you how the tarps came out. Very, very cool. So this one's set up. You can see that's nice and solid, but it looks like a piece of fabric draped over this metal shelving unit. And while it was still somewhat pliable, I stuck it down into the spot where I wanted it, which is back here, and made sure that it sat down onto the sand right. Very, very cool. It's a really cool idea. I'm going to use the same idea on the back of the ship, the very end of it, because there's a tarp over it initially, and I'll probably go with a lighter gray, but do the same thing. Position that over top of it, and then make it look like the tarp is just hanging off the end of it. Sorry. All right. I also used the same idea on this one. This one had a little chip out of the out of this shelf right here, so I just cut a little piece and made it look like this, a piece of cloth over top of it. And I can go back later and put some oils on that and dirty it up. And even the edges look frayed, like it's a torn piece of cloth, because it pretty much is kind of cloth in a way. It's woven type of fabric. It's a very neat idea. And I did something else too. I made a little box with a part in it, and all I did was I used some packaging brown paper, just a thicker paper, and I'm going to make maybe one or two more for some of the empty spots, and I just, you know, cut it out in like the box proportions that I can fold the flaps, and just glued them together with the alien felt glue. Make it look like a box. And just glued it down. Very, very cool. And again, there's that engine block. This one now I sat on its side, so that when you're looking around at all of this, it looks like they're all different machines, instead of me having to do like 12 different machines, which I didn't have. I just had to do, what I think, 5 of them or something like that, and then just position them in different positions so that they would look like they were different types of machinery. So, okay, so none of these are glued into the diorama yet, but everything is glued on them. They're all nice and solid. So let me kind of get in here and show you. So we got these ones. Here's the first tarp I did. It's like a gray tarp. Here are the middle ones. There's an empty spot there that I have to fill, like I said. Probably put a box in that as well and do something with it. And then I have the 2 end ones. Looking really cool. I also showed that I made a table, a workbench, and I just made it out of a piece of thin plywood, some wooden square stock, obviously, for the legs, some styrene sheet on the back and on the table. Painted it with the aluminum, and then went back over it with a lot of oils to dirty it up and make it look all greasy. All right, so this will go over here in this direction somewhat. And then while I was dirtying those up, I went ahead and did the same on the other parts and the barrels, that little thing over there, which I'll probably stick in between these little parts. Made everything look greasy and grimy and dirty for this diorama. So, and I showed you the air compressor. All right, so all the main parts are going really good. Now I need to start working on the kit parts to get those, the ones that are separate, get those painted and dirtied up to look like they're loose parts to go onto the ship. All right, so I cleaned up the parts from the ship that I want to use on the side as new pieces. The front piece, I cut these off and I sanded them up really good. This piece here, which came out of the side of the ship, and this piece that came off the top of one of the engines. And then of course Mando. So what I'm doing now is these 2 parts are going to have the aluminum and oily steel. All of these are going to have the alclad, because Obviously, he has his Beskar armor. These are all new and shiny. So I'm going to get a coat of the black base on first. Gloss black base. Let that dry, and then I'll be able to go back at these parts and do the either polished aluminum or chrome. And these I'll just get aluminum and the oily steel. All right, and here are the parts painted. So here are the chrome looking parts on the front top with the alclad polished aluminum. Pretty sweet. I don't want to handle them too much. The wings, I might put a dusting of like some weathering powders on these like I did on the ship, just to give it the idea that they've been kind of sitting around. The little top carburetor looking engine part on the top, which I have an idea for this in the display that I'll show you a little bit later. And then these two parts, which are actually the aluminum with the oily steel speckled onto it. And then I also made up the canopy for the cockpit to look like it's all dirty and dusty. So the first thing I did, we see a few shots of it kind of leaning up against the side of the ship. It's not inside the ship, it's not attached. But there is this big section on the bottom of it, which looks like it's part of the mechanism that will go down inside the ship. This isn't going to be on the ship, it's going to be loose. And once I did that, I just used some styrene stripping or flat sheet to make the main part, and some stripping along the bottom. I painted it aluminum along with the actual frame of it, aluminum. Then I went back over and I misted very lightly some sand or ivory sand ivory, to give it kind of that look of dust over top of it. And then I went back over with some of my dirty white weathering powder to make it look like it's really dirty and dusty. Turned out really cool. And this will be stacked somewhere, maybe moved up against the ship as well. So, all right, so all the parts are coming together. The only parts remaining outside of the ship are the other tail fin parts and the guns on the front that go in here. I still need to get those painted, and they'll be just kind of laying around somewhere on the diorama. And then I have to paint the bottom of the ship and the bottom engine and get that attached onto it to finish up the ship itself. So, all right, they're coming together really well. Getting ready to start putting all the elements together, gathering together some kit bash parts for some other little bits to go around, and then of course I have to get the figures painted and the droids and get them in place too. All right, so I'm working on the figures to go on to the diorama. Mando, Peli Motto, 2 of the pit droids. I have 1 more pit droid that I'm putting on. I may print out a gonk droid, I'm not sure. Oh, you know what? I also have the little BD1, I can't remember his name, BD1 or something like that, to go in here. So I'm starting to, well, first of all, when I had painted some other parts, I went ahead and put some alclad onto Mando to cover up his armor parts. I did the same thing with the pilot figure on the original N1 build that I did. So it's easier just to put the gloss black and the alclad over most of him, and then go back in and paint the other parts, the browns and the little bit of blue, field blue, some light brown, some dark brown, that kind of thing, to paint the rest of it. So I also put some metal rod into his feet to help support him up when I put him into display. I'll drill holes down into the sand base and just glue him down with 5-minute epoxy. So I'll be painting him shortly. So Peli Motto, I got her glued together with the pose I wanted, and I used some epoxy sculpt to fill in the gaps on her hips for her legs, because she was designed to be 3D printed to be a like an action figure. So her arms and legs were made to move, and it had those really obvious joints in the legs. So I filled those in. Turned out really nicely, I think. I just have a primer on her right now. I just put one brass tube into her foot, because the way I positioned her feet, one of the feet is just standing on the toe, and there wouldn't be enough space to try to glue in a tube or a rod, but that'll be fine. I can still put 5-minute epoxy on the end of that foot and glue her in place. So she's sort of like this. She's going to be directing the pit droids in inserting the spire into the engine and yelling at them. So one more thing I did, the pit droids are very fragile, as I mentioned earlier. I've broken their legs several times. So what I did was I bent some of this thin rod as well, used some CA glue to glue it onto the legs. I also put some CA into that hip joint, which was very fragile. So now it's still a little fragile, but a whole lot more sturdy. Before, these were just like super flimsy. So it should be a little better to try to glue them down onto the base. The feet are rather small. I might try to delicately put a little pin in those feet. We'll see. But they don't really have to be. They're so light. They're very small. But I didn't do it on the small one because it's smaller and it does have a little more hardy leg because of it. So I have to clean these up. Ultimately, I'm going to have to gently break off the arms to move them in the position that I want them to be. Maybe even the neck part, so it looks like they're in a different position when they're holding it up. And I'll show you that once I once I get them going. So, all right, now on to some painting of her, and then we'll look at getting them painted in position as well. All right, and here's my painted Peli Motto. I used hull red initially. I airbrushed it on, which is very much in the brown range anyway. Then I used my Artify dry brushes to lightly airbrush on some red, some light brown on those patches on her legs. I painted on some black on her belt, a little bit of blue on her shirt. The tips of her fingers are kind of either her bare fingers or a tan glove. Come on, focus. For her face, I put on first like a rose color. Let that dry, then I dry brushed on some skin tone and then some lighter colors. I might still go back over that a bit. It looks better from a distance. Gives you a little bit of color in her face, but she's so tiny, so small. Black on her hair, and then I dry brushed on some really dark gray, and then just barely put in some little specks for her eyes, and then some Tamiya clear. A little bit of metallic highlights. All right, but I think she looks pretty cool. So for now, I'm going to call her done. I'm going to set her aside. I might do some final touching up on her, but I'm going to go ahead and work on Mando next. All right, so quite a bit of work on just this right here. These little guys are really, really, really tricky. Even though I supported them, and they're working out, but I had to cut off parts of their arms and move them around and their head and that kind of thing, and reposition them to be how I want them to be. I also had to dig out some of the sand that I had put down into the base. And if you can see in there, I took a piece of thin styrene sheet and glued it onto their feet to give them a little more stability. So they're going to be glued down into the actual piece and then sand put over top of it. I have a piece of tape in there holding him in right now. So finally got them all positioned the way I want them to be, and try to go from some shots from the show itself. This one here is struggling and his head is pointing up. Oh, almost knocked him over. So these two are basically holding this and positioning it. This guy over here is inspecting the opening of the engine, and eventually once this gets closer, he's gonna position this inside. And then of course Peli Motto is sitting there yelling at him. What are you doing? Why can't you get it in there? So I attached this piece onto the base. It's on there now. I finished painting it and scorching it, and you can see there's a rod or a tube, a brass tube going down into the base, and I just painted it with some sand color to make it kind of blend in. And I'm still going to put more sand in to fill in these areas once I'm done. But this part is in there solid, so it's not going anywhere. They're not literally holding it up. They would not possibly be able to. They're just way too fragile. And this guy, of course, too, he isn't glued. None of them are glued in. But once I get the ship down, which I'm about to do here shortly, then I can glue them in place and glue them onto there. Peli Motto the same way. She's not glued. Well, he just filled on. She's not glued in, but there's a hole, and there's this little brass rod holding her in place, so I can move her and position her how I want her to be. All right, so finally, after getting these little pit droids all done, I'm going to get them painted. I'm going to get on some different colors and get them all ready to go. Then I'm going to glue these two onto the base and make them solid. He can wait until the ship is in place. I still have a few more things to do before I do that. So, okay. Alright, so I got the droids painted. These ones I went with a metallic brown, and then I used a little bit of a sponge to put down little flecks of silver to look like the paint's chipped off. This one I used a very light pale green, not gray. I think it's like sky or something. And then I did the same with him. Then on these two, I took a little googly eye and I sanded it on the bottom, the back off to remove the inner little black thing, and painted black behind it and just glued the googly eye onto the front. I think that turned out really cool. This one's really tiny. I didn't have one the same size, but you don't actually see it. But I just painted the eye black on him. So they are glued in place. And after I 5-minute epoxied them, I put sand around and put some scenic cement in there to hold it down. Look like they're just standing in the sand, filled in those gaps. All right, I think they turned out fantastically. Okay, let me get ahead working on the other figures as well. All right, so now that I've got most of the parts ready to go and get them glued down onto the diorama, I'm working on the positioning and finishing up some figures and some other parts that are going into the kit to give it some character. This is the fun part of the build I really enjoy doing a lot. So I found this file for a Jawa, and I made 2 different sizes. At first I was going to see, well, which one would work best, but I'm going to just use 2 different sizes because that looks like they're 2 unique Jawa. And they were also designed to be action figures like Peli Motto. So I glued them together. You can see that brownish looking part there is some epoxy sculpt that I molded around the waist to fill in the gaps. Put 2 little dots there for the eyes. They just had some little indents for sockets, which actually their eyes stick out and they're kind of orange looking. Glued their arms on, looking pretty cool. So those are just finishing up and drying, and then I'm going to go ahead and get some paint on them. And there's a scene in the show where the Jawa come in. They talk a lot about the Jawa and them getting the parts for the ship. So at one point, she comes in and she says, "Hey, look, the Jawa brought in a Tribonic Venturi power assimilator," which is this part from the kit. I always say it looks like a carburetor, but that's what it is. It's a Tribonic Venturi power assimilator. And of course, Mando's like, the Jawa had a Tribonic Venturi power assimilator? They didn't have it, they got it. And then they get into a whole discussion of how they get things. They steal them. They just steal them off of ships. So they bring it in a levitating platform, anti-gravity platform. And he talks to them. So what I did was I took some styrene sheet and I built a little levitating platform. So all this is 2 pieces of styrene sheet that have some I-beam sandwiched between them. And then I took parts from, it's dropped it and probably destroyed it. No, I didn't destroy it. I took parts from a Y-wing. Y-wings from Bandai are a bounty of detailed parts, and just filled in little parts around it to give it that machinery look. On the top, I just had a piece of screen, just regular window screen, and cut it out and glued it down with some CA glue. And I put a post in the bottom. So this is going to be sunk down into the kit, and it's going to go down into the base and look like it's levitating. And then they're going to be just standing next to it like they're just bringing it in to present it to them. So I still do a little bit more detailing on this. This I had put Alclad on previously. There's some rubber black pipes on it and that kind of thing. So I'll get that fixed up. Got to get this painted, get these painted, and these will be ready to go onto the diorama as well. All right, there are the 2 Jawa with their levitating platform and the Tribonic Venturi power assimilator on top. You can see the post there in the bottom. I still have to put some sand color on that post to help to hide it. Kind of hard to see them, but you can see their eyes are actually kind of a greenish or a yellow. I was thinking they were red, but they're really not. Go back and watch the scene again. Have them all glued in place. All right, looking pretty cool. All right, so I completed Mando, and I went ahead and glued him in place. I'm hurrying to get this completed in time for Wonderfest, so some things I didn't take time out to just show a little video of the finished figure, but I went ahead and got him glued in place. So I did fashion up a little grinder for him that he's holding in his hand, pretending that he's grinding the paint off of the ship. And I have a hose attached to it that goes down and into that really cool looking air compressor, 3D printed air compressor. And I just stuck that up onto a platform or one of the pallets, glued both of those onto there, glued the hose onto it. So very cool. So he's in a nice action pose. He's actually working on the ship, getting ready to sand off some of the yellow paint. I think he turned out fantastically. All right, and he's not the main focus. None of the figures are the main focus. The ship is the main focus, but they're all there to really sell the diorama that they're building this, refurbishing this junked craft. So, all right, so it's definitely all coming together. All right, so I'm coming down to the wire and finishing up all the parts and getting them glued down onto the diorama. I'm trying not to show the entire thing because I want to reveal that at the end, but I do want to show some parts that I've already completed. So I used more of the tarp technique on the other engine spire, and I didn't want to have to build the extra connecting pieces, so I just built it separate. and I put that over top of it just to hide that. I haven't glued it down yet. I went with a light gray on this one, and then I'm going to I put some oils to dirty it up, some powders, that kind of thing. It's probably going to be positioned somewhere like about here. And I did one more. Let me show you the other. I did one on the end of the ship to hide that end piece there and have it down onto the base. The ship is now glued in place, which, like I said, I'm not going to reveal the whole thing yet right now, but this is solid. It's glued down. These parts are still loose. I haven't glued them down yet. I have glued down the back cabinets and some other pieces. So all I have to do now is finish gluing down like these various containers, and then I'm going to have a bunch of little parts strewn around the display, including some tools and some engine bits and the table that I built and things like that. And just right now it's just adding on some little bit of details, and then I'll be able to do the final reveal. All right, so working on the last of the accessories to go onto the diorama. So some of them I showed previously, parts of the ship. This is the top and the two wings. This piece here that I cut out, this piece here that I cut out. I went ahead and painted these parts of the tail, and mostly with aluminum, and went back over with some black to give them some scorching. But these other parts, I got this this kit from my local hobby shop, and it's nearly the right scale. It's 1/25 scale. This model's 1/24 scale. But it's really cool. It has a bunch of garage parts. Sorry. Well, let me show you them. So it has this toolbox, which I painted in like a red, kind of a dirtied looking thing. This the shelving, I probably won't use this since I already have a bunch of shelves and I have nothing to put on it. This is really cool. It's settling tanks or welding tanks. Obviously I painted them and did some salt and hairspray. And it came with that little hose and the little torch on the end. Really cool. So this looks really nice. I definitely want to use that. The main thing that I wanted was some tools. And you can see how tiny these tools are in this scale. There's 10 of them. There's a hacksaw, a bunch of wrenches, some pliers, screwdrivers, a 4-way lug remover, a hammer, and a rubber mallet. Very cool. So I painted those all just with steel. Went back over with some colors for the handles and some oils to weather them up. So I'll cut those up. Not sure if I'm going to use this or not. We'll see. I'd have to put a few tools in it to give it, you know, it look like it actually is being used. But we'll see. Definitely some pretty cool things. These are really big parts, but they're definitely parts of the ship. So I'll have to figure out where to put these, with the idea that they're here. At one point, Peli Motto says, you can see all the parts are here. They just need to be put together. And she's not wrong. They're all here. And we see these parts lying around different points. This one here, the little robot shows where it goes, that kind of thing. So, all right. So let me go ahead and start getting these placed onto the diorama. All right, so finally got everything all attached onto the diorama. Tons and tons of glue used in this build. Mostly 5-minute epoxy to glue all these parts down. CA glue, of course. regular Plastrock Bonding for the model kits, scenic cement, and static grass glue to hold down the parts of the diorama. But everything is all secure and attached. So let me go ahead and show you the highlights of this build. So we'll start right here in the front. So we've got Peli Motto, the 3 pit droids struggling to get the engine part into the ship. Back here I have BD1. I thought about putting him up on here, but I didn't want him standing out. He's not like the main focus, so we'll just leave him over there. You can see him back there. I have some various engine parts strewn around. So there's the battery, there's a little battery there. Over on this side, we have some metallic wall and some doors. I put these 2 little pieces up on here to give it some more character. Some of the standard Star Wars containers just glued in place. Several of the engine parts for the back tail over here, glued in place. We have the tarp over the back of the ship. We have Mando using a grinder to grind the paint. It's being powered by an air compressor with a hose. We have some more engine parts down there on the back or on the bottom. We have our shelving with the various components and engine parts, gasoline containers, propane tanks, batteries, all kinds of things. My other tarps that I made that little piece over there, that little machinery that changes oil back there, the other engine spire with a tarp over it, several more little parts down here. I have 2 of the ship parts on a pallet right there, some more parts. I have that table that I built, little engine part on it, a bunch of little tools from that little tool kit that I showed you. Look pretty cool. Back here I also have part of the wing leaned up against there, the main top of the ship for the wings, the other piece over here. Some acetylene tanks or welding tanks. Here's the 2 guns for the ship. Some more of the containers for Star Wars. And then we of course have the 2 Jawa with the carbonic Venturi power assimilator that they're delivering on their hovering platform. And then finally the ship, which is the main reason that they're all here. Really happy with this build. Quite a bit of fun. Really fun to be able to do a lot of the modifying and scratch building and tons of 3D printing, of course, on this build as well, in order to get all of these accessories. So, all right, but she's all ready to go. All right, so really happy with this build. Turned out really great. I will be taking this to Wonderfest the end of this week on Friday, along with my original clean version of the N1 Starfighter and some other models that I had completed. So hope to see some of you there. Certainly if you're there, come up and introduce yourself and say hi. I always like talking to other modelers and seeing your work as well. So absolutely come and say something to me if you see me. But other than that, thanks to all my new subscribers, and I will see you after Wonderfest, where I will have some video and some footage of that awesome show as well.